Yes, hello, folks. Welcome to the weekly Manchester United podcast. As always, I'm your host, Phil Branch, joined with my regular co-host, the excellent James Rhodes. After what is a fantastic weekend's Tuesday here, we will get back to recording this podcast on Mondays. A few things have prevented that from happening over the last few weeks, but yesterday was President's Day here in the US, so all our kids were home, unfortunately. But other than that, how was your weekend, mate?
Yeah, not bad. We had some good weather. We got to drop our son off at family for a night, so we got a bit of a break and some fun things. So it was a good weekend all in all. How about yours?
I was in a cabin all weekend with my kids. By Monday, I was ready to drop them off at Woody Allen's. Oh, pushed them down the hill on the sleds. Everything. Hoping it wasn't come back. But no, it was good. It was up with Big Bear. Always, it's beautiful up there. Like
Yes.
snow and stuff, which is very different from what we're getting. It's only like 70 miles from me, and the contrast in weather between up there and what we have down here in Orange County couldn't be greater. Although it is raining
Yeah.
today, but it was a good weekend. I had a bit of a panic trying to watch the United match. Actually missed the Rasmus Højlund goal because
The first one. Easy to miss that. I mean, that
yeah,
was
I know.
fast, wasn't it?
Well, I ended up getting like a 30-minute free view because this wasn't my cabin I was in, so fortunately didn't have the
Got it.
requisite television channels to watch it.
Yeah.
And for some reason, the free view, the clock froze, so I ended up getting the whole game. But yeah, 35 seconds in, Mr. Højlund off the score on the score sheet, and he gets another second improvised goal, which he most definitely meant. And 2-1 after 13, 14 minutes, United somehow managed to not concede after that, which again is another positive sign. They've been able to do that recently, where they can find themselves some difficult situations and find a way to win the game, which is something they weren't doing earlier in the season. One of the things that was quite different that I noticed myself this weekend was I didn't spend any time on social media watching the game because I was watching it on my phone.
Yep.
And how I felt after the game seemed to be very different from how a lot of social media, a lot of people on social media felt. I was actually quite happy. Yes, of course, you can point to the fact that United can't control tempo, they can't control the game. There's no question about that. That is definitely an issue. And but overall, I was quite snobby about the 1-0 win against Luton at Old Trafford. I certainly wasn't so snobby about these 3 points.
Yeah, it kind of depends on your perspective at this point in terms of what the season has to offer and what you're looking for the rest of the season. I think for me, I've reached certainly a point where all I pretty much care about is if United will pick up the points.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's maybe a judgment on the season as a whole, but with everything that's gone on in EOS, all the things that we're expecting, I'm certainly looking a lot more to the future than I am to the present. Um, for so many times over the last years, we've been stressed about how a season is going to go and how things are going to happen and what's going to occur. Whereas I feel very certain that regardless of what happens now, the future will hold positives for United, and that the right things are being done. And so I'm much more interested in just, can we get the 3 points? And hopefully that means secure Champions League for next year. I prefer to watch that rather than be scheduled for those Thursday nights. It looks as though fifth place is lining up as we kind of expected or hoped to be enough for Champions League. The English teams in the Champions League right now are doing pretty well. They're mostly going to go through over some of the German teams. I think that will fall down the ladder. I think the Italian teams might in the end too, but we'll see with some of that today, with some of the Champions League matches going on. So I think fifth is enough. And, at this point, it's February 20th today. I'm not really expecting to see much of a progression in terms of United's play style, things like that. It's sort of a little bit pointless to look at it in some respect. Um, So yeah, I was happy with the 3 points as well. I was a little stressed during the game. There's
More than that,
stressful moments, like it was a stressful game to watch, but I was relieved and happy that we got the win. I understand, obviously this is going to be an endless debate through the end of the year, with varying degrees of opinion and all of that on, yeah, we cannot control games. We can't. We don't. And why are we winning? Primarily, the front three are just doing what they do for the most part and scoring goals now. But they probably should have scored more, to be honest. But they were really dangerous in the counter. I mean, you can see, the finishing wasn't quite there. I think both Hoyland and Garnacho failed to get around the keeper in one-on-one situations on 2 occasions. But creating those chances, we're doing it. It's dangerous. It's kind of fun to watch that. It does remind me a lot of some of the Ole years as well, in terms of how they're playing, how it's happening, what they're doing in transition. Oh, well,
yeah.
I mean, it's fine. I understand why people would be concerned for the future with that, but at the same time, right now, I'm kind of okay with it for what this season is and what we have to offer right now.
Look, the possession stats in games are not good, and they're very telling. I mean, even if you look at the possession stats in the Champions League, not good either. United surrendered the bulk of possession to Luton. And the thing what was interesting to me about Luton was they were playing a high line. So it was United that were obviously targeting them. And to be fair, United were targeting them early on this high line. You could see that Onana was picking balls out on the wing. You could see that was a tactic of United's, and the game was there to be won early. Right? They should have taken control of that. And got at the third goal as usual. It's always this third goal that United find difficult, and they've been on a very good run recently. But so many of the games have looked similar. Even going to the Newport game, you're 2-0 up, kill the game. And for some reason, that third goal is not harder than the first and the second. United shouldn't need to score 3 goals to win games. They didn't, thankfully, this weekend, and they didn't.
Close, right? We were,
and they didn't. I don't think United are going to ever be perfect. I think other than the West Ham game, we'll take the Crystal Palace game out of it, since I was a Carabao. But other than the West Ham game at home, United haven't really controlled the game where you felt comfortable in the whole 90 minutes. The other big concern, of course, is Luke Shaw off again, injured. United are obviously rushing Shaw back because he's such a key player to them. They don't have anything. They don't have an alternative. I think similar to Martinez, he's transformative. Kobbie Mainoo is transformative. Those injuries have been so detrimental to Ten Hag and to Manchester United throughout the season. But Luke Shaw, once again, picking up an injury. This is a big concern.
Yeah, it is. And whether he's being, I don't know which is worse. Is he rushing back to get involved to play, or was he fine and picked up a totally different injury in yet another game? I'm not sure which it is, but either way, there was an article from The Athletic, I think, that was talking about Luke Shaw's availability over time at United. And to be fair, from his huge, massive injury under, Louis van Gaal years ago, which could have been a career ender easily. I mean, considering what had happened, it was a good return up in availability that kind of peaked last year, and now it's come crashing down again to pretty poor levels that are not sustainable. When you have Tyrell Malacia, who has not been available all season and is still the missing man, who still is on milk cartons at this point in time. Reguilon leaving in January is a little bit odd.
I know. I was thinking a lot about that. I'm like, why did
I thought he was okay. I thought he was quite serviceable for us. I think it's better for the setup than Lindelof playing there. So I don't know. It's some of it's a little questionable. What's going on with that? But certainly it's a problem.
If you were going to let one lone player leave in January, it would have been Amrabat, in my opinion, because
I don't think he's the one without a cancellation clause in it, unfortunately.
Well, but once I understand when United wanted to cut the wage bill and not carry any players they don't have to. But had Reguilon have stayed, he would have been playing games right now.
Yeah.
Right? Like he would have been brought on the last couple of games, there's no doubt. You have a need for a left back. If Malacia is still nowhere near the first team, which I assume he had to have been for them to decide to consider letting Reguilon go.
Right.
Now it looks like he's further away. The same has happened to Mason Mount. If you go back to end of December, Ten Hag said Mount is on the grass. He's a week or two away. And now no one knows when he's going to be back. I have serious concerns that Mason Mount will never be fully fit for Manchester United. This is now 2 seasons in a row where he's been plagued by injuries. That is not good. And I have serious concerns about him, but I hope I'm wrong on that. But I just look at that when you keep
that insider account, has had some stuff on injuries. I think that's been okay. I know that there was a point where United were concerned specifically about the leaks coming through that account. But I'd say what's concerning is if it is accurate, when you talk about Tyrell Malacia, he still has no time frame to return at all.
But even if he does have a time frame to return, United have to be looking at another left back and saying, will he ever reach anything close to
Correct.
a long, long time. And even when he was at peak, you bet was he good enough to be a starting left back? Maybe a really, really, really good backup. I thought he had some really good games, but I thought his form started to dip towards the end of that period before he got injured, where Luke Shaw recovered his place. And you could see that there was a clear difference in ability between the two. £12 million left back from far and away, not a bad deal, but not your starting left back. The other issue is Wan-Bissaka. Dallow's been playing well, right back, but Wan-Bissaka, what's going on there?
Yeah, I know it's another odd one, another mystery. That apparently he is injured, but it was supposed to be he was held out for a precaution. And then again, he was held out for precaution. And then he's still not back weeks later. So it can't be a precaution why he's been being held out. There must be some reason there, some injury going on. So supposedly that is the reason too, but it does present a problem when you have one fit fullback. And to Dallow's credit, because he went through a lot of injuries early on in his career. I think when we signed him, he was rehabbing from a surgery, and then he spent a lot of seasons coming back and forth and in and out of the team on injury. Has played way too many minutes, and I'm concerned. I am seriously concerned because Dallow has been good, but what happens if Dallow picks up an injury? This is, I think, his first season not picking up a major injury. What happens if he does now? We don't even have fullbacks. We don't have any fullbacks healthy at the moment. Outside of him, I was a little bit questionable why they also let go of Alvaro Fernandes in January. I understand it, but it is I understand the concept of wanting him to play because he's somebody that they could sell, and maybe they don't view him as a top level player. But it's part of why my perspective on this season is it is a little bit of like, I'll just take the points where we get them at this point, because a lot of strange decisions.
I just don't think Ten Hag rated Fernandes. Fernandes wasn't really playing at Granada either.
Yeah.
And so, Benfica know what they're doing, to be fair. And I think for him, maybe this is a good level for him. He goes to Benfica, he plays and develops into the fullback that he really could be. I think that'd be great. But I just don't think Ten Hag rated him. I think if he did, he would still be there. And as we can see, there's major change going on at United about how quickly they're moving players on, what the threshold is for keeping a player, what is bringing them to make certain decisions. Obviously, and we'll get into this with the Dan Ashworth thing, but FFP and PSR and how suffocating this is now for clubs. How this is seriously impeding how clubs go about their business, and I think this is going to radically change football, but we'll get into that in a minute. But yeah, it's definitely threadbare at fullback positions, and in some sense, you need to get knocked out of the Champions League will have been a blessing for them, because they do not have the squad to handle Champions League, FA Cup, Premier League, even if they'd have kept those loan players.
Yeah, I agree. We're pretty lucky at this point in time. I think that it's down to a game or week or less at this point, because that's allowing certainly a lot of the players to stay fit, stay healthy, stay fresh. I mean, you take what's working right now. If you look at that front three, I think if you make one change, it stops working, and it's winning us games at the moment. So you're hoping all three of them can stay fit. And to their credit, Garnacho, Højlund, since he's come back, I say actually come into the team fully from that back injury that he probably had in preseason. The three of them have been probably the three fittest players at United, right? Rashford, Højlund, and Garnacho over the course of the season, sustaining no injuries, not being out of the team, being able to play as much as is called upon, and that's a positive. That is certainly a positive that I hope can continue to sustain us moving forward through the rest of the year.
I also want to know what's in the water in Portugal. No, Bruno Fernandes never seemed to get injured, which is
I
great.
know.
Let me ask you about Andre Onana, because for all the right reasons, people have stopped talking about Onana over the last couple of weeks. I was listening to a statistic the other day. Forget the guy's name. My apologies. I would like to credit him correctly, but he was saying that only two other goalkeepers have kept more clean sheets in the Premier League than Onana, which kind of surprised me, I'll be honest. And of course, United have got the most points per goal ratio in the league. The goal difference, I think, was +1, is it now? Yeah, +1.
Finally,
which is the first time since Wolves at home at the start of the season. But I thought Onana has had a decent couple of weeks. I thought he had a good game at Villa, to be fair. Have you seen signs of improvement in the last few weeks?
Yeah, well, I think that he's been overall quite a net positive in the Premier League itself. You know, there's been a couple shaky moments, but I think there's a lot of games he's done really well. I still believe that one of the things that I think has improved dramatically under Ten Hag with Onana and the team is when we do get the ball in possession or off a goal kick or something, and we play it short, I don't feel under the same amount of threat where I feel like it's coming back to us instantly. If it does, our losses of possession tend to be just simply because, in transition, we attack so quickly, lose the ball quickly, but I feel a lot more confidence. I don't have that same nervousness constantly whenever the ball is in the goalkeeper's hands that we've had before. I don't really think about it that much anymore. It feels sort of normal. So no, I think he's been really good. It is a funny situation because he was so bad in the Champions League after reaching a final the previous year with Inter that you just wonder what's going on. I think he'll come good. I think we've both said since the start that he probably will come good overall. Goalkeeper can be a funny position. A lot of it's confidence. A lot of it is, it's like kickers in the NFL. Like there's just sort of a magic that goes with it, where in some case, sometimes they're just bad, and they can be a great player, and sometimes it just goes bad, and then they get it right, and they'll make 50 in a row. And I feel it's the same a little bit with Onana. I don't think he'll ever be the shot stopper in certain contexts that David De Gea was at his peak, for sure. But I don't think that that's ultimately necessary. And I think how he's performing now is a position I wouldn't worry about, given how I wouldn't worry about it. And the more we control games and the less pressure he's under, I think the better that will be. We're still really quite poor from set pieces, but I don't think that's really down to the goalkeeper at this point.
Couple of other questions. Casemiro. He's lucky not to be sent off. I can understand why people would look at both those challenges and say you shouldn't be sent off for that. But with modern football, that's different. Some weeks you'll get away with it, some weeks you won't. I'm pleased that the referee used common sense with him. Ten Hag obviously was right to take him off at halftime. But this is a consistent trend with Casemiro. And one of the things that I see with him is he picks up a lot of similar bookings. And he picks up a lot of similar bookings with people running a pace at him or getting caught in possession sometimes in midfield. In Spain, you get a lot more time in the ball. And he's very good on the ball. He's very good at picking passes out. He's very, very good with certain things that don't involve physical contact. In England, the game's a lot quicker, and you don't get that time in midfield. You don't get that time to put the foot in the ball, lift your head, pick a pass. It's less technical in some sense, but the speed and intensity is totally different. And the fact that he didn't get a red card before he ever came to the Premier League, and the fact that every week he looks like he's about to get sent off,
I know.
is a major concern, because he's supposed to be the leader in midfield. He's supposed to be the example to Kobbie Mainoo. And I'm watching Casemiro every week going, every single week I feel like he's on the verge of getting 2 yellow cards for the same fouls.
Yep. It's a combination of things, right? Because I feel a little bit sympathetic for him. He went through this last year too, right? Where there was a lot of times he was making some dangerous tackles. But it's sort of a half and half problem, because I don't know that there are many players that could defend the kind of spaces that are available in United's midfield. And at the same time, he's certainly slowed down quite a bit from where he's been as a player in his career, which he's never been ultimately as disciplined as you would like him to be, for the Premier League especially. But it's hard to know, a little bit which comes first. These midfield issues we've had this season, the spaces that have to be covered where he's ending up making, rash challenges or pulling players down from behind simply because he kind of has to at that point, are something we've been dealing with regardless of who's been in that midfield. And ultimately, he's not up to the level at this point of defending those gaps, but is there anybody that is?
Tom Huddlestone.
What's that?
Tom
Yeah.
Huddlestone. He scored in the under 21s against City yesterday. Unbelievable.
Yeah, isn't that funny?
Anyway, but no, I mean, of course, 2 other quick points about yesterday or Sunday was once again the composure of Kobbie Mainoo. When we talk about injuries that have had a major impact on United's season, there's some obvious ones. Lisandro Martinez, obviously, United don't have any leg-for-leg alternative. Luke Shaw, same thing. Mainoo. And when you think about this from Ten Hag's perspective, United had their worst start to a season in 60 years. If you could pick 3 players out of United's team you would not want to get injured at this moment in time, knowing what we know right now, those would be the 3, in my opinion. It would be Kobbie Mainoo, because United are just such a different team without him, right?
Yeah.
It would be Luke Shaw and Lisandro Martinez. Those are the 3 players that are completely transformative for me with United. That it's such a different Manchester United team without those 3. We know how impactful Lisandro Martinez and his injury has been. We know how impactful Luke Shaw's injury and has been on United. But now I'm watching this week by week going, Kobbie Mainoo's injury may be the worst of them all that really cost Ten Hag at the start of the season.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to look at it and say he's probably been United's most important player since he's come back. And yeah, I mean, you think about the midfield options without him, and it's a bit scary, right?
I mean, what he has, you will never learn from a coach.
Yep.
No coach can teach you that composure, the brain, how quickly you think, the patterns you see, the coaching, is very important, but it's oversold.
Yeah.
But 20% of your game.
Yeah.
So many things that you learn in football or in pretty much any sport are the things that you learn from experience. And that, knowing how to think quickly in the moment, knowing how to spot things that you just can't coach. You coach technique, you coach how to, control the ball, you can coach certain things, but how to execute that is totally different. Kobbie Mainoo is like a pearl in an oyster. You can open up 1,000 shells and you'll find one pearl. And you get one of these players in your academy, you are so lucky. It also makes me think, when we talked about this before, how would Declan Rice have affected Kobbie Mainoo's development? I mean, if United had signed Mainoo in January and he was putting in these performances, we'd say this is £100 million footballer easily.
Yeah.
What a sensational football player.
Yep. Yeah, he is. And like you said, it's something it's practically unduplicatable. You're not going to coach a player into being that good. And yeah, I do consider that he's a player. Yeah, when you talk about a player like Declan Rice that United probably should have signed over the years, he's in a lot of ways different in some ways, but in a lot of ways, you've got the player at home of that quality, of that transformative ability, of that energy and what he brings into the midfield, a composure, maturity. There's so many things that, like you say, are just uncoachable in that respect, and it's an incredible. It is amazing to see, but that leads me to another question, which is, he's the obvious player that you're going to say no matter what happens, you could build around him.
Mm-hmm.
In the midfield. I don't think there's any style of football, any play, any tactics that doesn't use a player of his quality, right? And of his ability, what he can do. Is there anybody else in United's midfield anymore that you can say that? Because, Bruno Fernandes has been obviously a topic of major discussion and contention with United at this point in time. When you watch some of the problems with the inability to control games, certainly you have to look at Bruno Fernandes and say that he's a part of that. Some of that being on purpose. It's not to denigrate the contributions that he's had, because in many instances he was transformative for United for years, taking him from a team that couldn't produce a threat against anybody to a team that could and could score a lot of goals. And a lot of those transitions happen because of Bruno Fernandes. But the other side of that coin is, it is a constant hot potato, that ball. As soon as it gets to his feet, it's gone. And there is no slowing it down. There is no controlling the game with the way that he plays. And I really like Bruno Fernandes. I have for years. But the way we're playing, I think, is the only way we're going to play with Bruno. And I'm yet to see much evidence to the contrary of that.
I think there's a couple of reasons. I think one, that because United are a counter-attacking team right now, that is how they pose a threat. That they're so conditioned to get the ball moving forward quickly because they've tremendous pace in the front three. I mean, Ashworth has tremendous pace. Hoyland has it's blatant pace, and of course, Garnacho is quick, and that's how United hurt you. Before Fernandes came in, United were a counter-attacking team under Solskjaer, right? Then they were able to control possession in games, but they had McTominay and Fred in behind that were giving you much more of a defensive cover. So you could do that. You could slow the game down. I don't think United are capable of slowing the game down, partly because of their front three. I think they don't, especially the two white players, they don't want to defend. And in a game against Luton, it's a bit, I can understand where Ten Hag's going, look, the way to win this game is to get the third goal. Okay? That will control the game because the spaces are wide open. And one of the things that Ten Hag criticized United for was dropping a little bit too deep. And this is, of course, because they don't completely trust themselves to be able to see games. They still got that, muscle memory of conceding goals, and I still think United's best form of defense at the minute is attack.
Sure.
But it is definitely a problem, and it's been a problem where they can't control possession, they can't control games, and that has cost them up until up until the Bournemouth game. That's been costing them. Before we'll move on from this quickly, because I just want to make one more mention of Rasmus Højlund, because Højlund again, fantastic. Takes his first opportunity really well. It was one opportunity that United missed repeatedly, time and time again after that, but he took it really well. Maybe he should have had a hat trick. But I was watching him. There's so many aspects to his play. Scores so many different goals. He could score in the air, could score with his left foot, score with his right foot. His passing's quite good in the build-up. His hold-up play is quite good in the build-up. And this kid has so much development left to do. But his goal-scoring return recently, since really since that Villa game has been magnificent. Youngest player in the Premier League ever to break that consecutive goal scoring record.
Yep.
He really looks like a top class striker now.
Yeah, he does. It looks like it was a fantastic, purchase in the end. He's somebody who's, they paid a lot of money for him, but you could always see the tools were there. It's about putting it together physically. He's got it all, and I think that it'll continue. I obviously I don't know about every single game.
Inevitably, it leads to questions about Anthony and the
Yeah.
positions they take up, and the fact that they now seem to have balance in the front three. They now seem to have a front three that works together as a unit. Garnacho and Højlund seem to be striking up some bit of a partnership that never existed with Anthony,
Yep.
which does not look good for Anthony. And I don't want to keep singling him out, but it does seem like putting Garnacho on the right is finally giving United that balance up front that they need.
Well, it's the problem is every single game now we can see it more and more, and it just keeps happening, right? It's consistent. It's one of the only consistent things that we've seen is that with this front three, they keep making chances. I mean, Rashford is able to put Garnacho in behind one-on-one. That chance, even though Garnacho didn't score it, doesn't happen with Anthony. He's not making that run. He's not doing that. The goals that occurred would not be happening with a different personnel up front. And so you can just see it time and time again. And so it's just because it continues to be the thing that's working every week, right? Højlund, as you said, 6 goals in a row. It continues to happen. It continues to work. Not 6 goals in a row, 6 games in a row with I think 7 goals now. And it just continues to work. And I think it's less of a question now and more of an answer that I think we're certain of. Ultimately, that leads to a little bit of a problem with all these positions that we've talked about, because now we're talking about left back that United are going to need. We know at center back they're going to need players, 1 or 2 there. We know at right back with the questions over Wan-Bissaka. We're talking about Casemiro. We're talking about Bruno. And now we're talking about in the front three that I don't know that there's anybody that can replicate what this front three can produce off the bench or depth or anywhere, which means, of course, how many players do you need to bring in there in order, because they can't play every game. If we were in multiple competitions, I think we'd be struggling severely right now, besides the FA Cup, obviously. But if we were in these other competitions or still in Europe, we'd be struggling because this front three could not be playing 60 games a year, a lot of problems to solve. So
well, that brings us on to our next question. Our next discussion is Dan Ashworth, because lots of discussions taking place over Dan Ashworth. And part of what we were talking about here is that in some sense, Ten Hag maybe overachieved a bit last season, getting it in third. They didn't have the infrastructure behind Ten Hag to support that progression for the team this summer. Now with PSR biting so hard, with FFP being a very real thing, having legal teeth, the whole Dan Ashworth thing, in my opinion, is going to become very, very normalized in football, where there's going to be big fees paid for people that don't understand how to run football clubs efficiently, because it doesn't matter how rich your owners are anymore. It doesn't matter how much money you can throw against the wall. It matters how well your business is run. And before United make lower appointments, they need to make an appointment like Ashworth, because people need to know who they're working for. What is incredible to me in this whole story was, this is infuriating, I'm sorry. Ferguson tipped United off about Dan Ashworth a while ago. Richard Arnold made the phone call and said, "You'd be working under John Murda." Yeah. Naturally, Dan said, "That's not for me." I'm not disrespecting John Murda or anything. I'm just illustrating how inept United are behind the scenes, and United have been paying an incompetence tax for a decade.
Yeah.
With poor executive hires. There was a statistic put out last week. I don't know how accurate it is. It depends how you want to look at it. Where this United's 2020 squad was the most expensive in history. It could be argued either way whether it is or it isn't. But what we can say with a high degree of confidence, that statistic is a reflection of incompetence more than anything else.
Yeah.
And I've seen people argue, oh, if you need to pay 20 million for Ashworth, what that's going to do in the transfer market. I understand that perspective. It is significantly above the market precedent for people in that position.
Yeah.
But this is a reflection for me of how football is going to change and how these people will start commanding these types of fees, because unlike players, there's millions of there's very good players that are obvious to the eye, but people who can do this job well, they're few and far between. They'll eventually emerge, but it's really, really, really important that you need to get someone of this caliber that understands how to run the football club effectively, because if that is done right, that will save you hundreds of millions.
Well, exactly. I mean, not to belabor the point too much about this, but United paid 10 million for Amrabat on loan this year, plus wages.
Yeah, I mean, they paid more for Mina Riola's commission for Pogba.
Yeah.
Mina Riola made 24 million commission for Pogba.
Yep. And you look at it and say, yeah, getting the right people is worth so much more. You talk about the PSR concerns, the things about how they spent 533 million, 85 million for Anthony, 10 million on an Amrabat loan, enormous fees being paid out. The Casemiro deal, which obviously was something that there had been a lot of reports that Ineos highlighted, the kind of wages they're being paid, the Ronaldo signing. I mean, you look at the amount of money that has been spent. 15 million for Ashworth pales in comparison to just the waste of the last 2 or 3 years at United. I mean, it's
scandalous.
It is absurd. And so, I understand why they don't, or at least I wouldn't say don't want to pay it, because I'm not necessarily sure they don't want to pay it, but I would say I understand why the appearance, of course, has to be that it's pulling blood from stone to get that kind of money out of the club. It's fine. It makes sense. And ultimately, they'll, of course, hope to reach some sort of compromise, because they do want him in with a shorter gardening leave than 20 months, which is a little bit ridiculous. And of course, I think we've talked about this, but I think is a little bit, it's kind of silly in some respects. If you're talking about, well, we don't want Dan Ashworth to talk about Newcastle's transfer plans. Okay. He's going to be on the phone with them no matter what he's doing and what the situation is. It's a little bit silly in some respects, in regards to all of that, but certainly they'll want to reach a compromise that allows them to start sooner rather than later. But I think whatever it takes is probably worthwhile. There's a lot of decisions that have to be made.
Newcastle went and got Ashworth from Brighton.
Yeah.
Their argument is they went through the front door and out the back door to get him, and United have had a public courtship of Ashworth. But this is what happens in football. If you look at January, Newcastle couldn't spend in January because of PSR. Yeah. They too are heavily restricted with how they go into the market. In some sense, City were able to do this without regulation. We're able to, buy players at will, and and of course they've been successful with that. Other clubs now can't replicate the City model because of how restrictive PSR is. Yep. And United have a big problem with PSR, no doubt about it. So, there's two questions here. Is one, can United afford not to get him? And two, I think that with Ashworth, I don't think it benefits Newcastle for him to be sitting on big wages, because they have to think about PSR. Yep. Does it really make sense for us to have Ashworth sitting on the sidelines to 2026, paying him full wages is which they'd have to do? Yep. And how much of the information that he's going to bring to United is truly proprietary, where it's so unique that no one else can replicate it, that it would severely harm Newcastle. Look, Peter Kenyon did this, went to Chelsea, hijacked their move for Iron Robin. But it doesn't look like Newcastle are going to qualify for the Champions League. Mm-hmm. So I don't think, if Ashworth's there or not, most of their targets that they're going to go after this summer would not be easily poachable by other clubs that are in the Champions League. United may not be there anyway, but if they are,
Yeah.
I don't think there's any target that Newcastle will go after that any other club couldn't get if they're in the Champions League. And, Newcastle need a multi-club model, right? United need this
Yes.
too. Oh, this is just the reality of football. We see what's happening with
Yeah.
Saturday going to City. And they're still quite a ways away from accomplishing that. So how much value does Ashworth really have to Newcastle right now?
Very little. I mean, it is a bit of a ridiculous thing
Well,
because
sorry to interrupt. Ashworth says he
yeah,
needs 6 years to build a club.
yeah.
And
So
he's not head of recruitment either.
no, he's
he's
not.
the guy that comes around and says, this is who we go after.
Yeah. I know it's like, look, what his expertise is not really so much. I think it would almost be an insult to assume and to state that Dan Ashworth's expertise has to do with his knowledge that he would have obtained as a part of the Newcastle team. It's his he's an and that's true of most executives when they're hired into business, when they're hired into football clubs and things like that. It's not the knowledge that they, the data, I should say, rather than knowledge, but it's not the data that they're going to bring from somewhere that makes them valuable or makes them effective. It's their inherent knowledge and ability of what they have and what they know, from their experience. And so it's a little bit silly, the whole aspect of it. Newcastle are going to pay a lot of money. They could get 8 million compromise in there. That's going to help them with their situation, which, given where they've been at and spending wise, actually does more for them positively than it would for United to save that money. And yeah, I think ultimately they will compromise, but it is a little bit silly.
Did you
You
hear
know,
his press conference on Friday about it?
what was that?
Did you hear Eddie Howe in his press conference on Friday about it?
Yeah, I did, and
Which is quite remarkable.
yeah, I
He
feel as
actually wants him out.
no, and I feel as though it's a little bit of posturing, and it's kind of funny because when you look at some of the oil clubs and the actions and things that have happened, it's kind of remarkable how, from a football perspective, professional Manchester City tend to operate themselves in almost every zone of football business. And I don't think it's an accident why they're so successful. United poached Omar Barada from there without anything coming out of them. Negative, positive, whatever. Pep did his answers in his press conferences and revealed a little bit of emotion, but it was sort of like very clean business. And that tends to be how Manchester City operate. And I think it's a little bit small of Newcastle, the way that they're responding to the situation.
Well,
Um,
I
and
think what's
that's how
funny
I see
about
it.
this, James, is that in the last few weeks we've had managers sniping at United. We had Rob Edwards sniping at United yesterday, which I thought disappointed me because I really like him. I think he's done an exceptional job claiming that, it's only 4 minutes added on, but typical of Manchester United. Anyone who's been watching United over the last few weeks would know it's nonsense. The time was added on against
Yeah.
Villa. The time was added on against Wolves. We were 3-2 up. And we've seen Pep Guardiola have a snip, and now we've seen Eddie Howe have a snip. And I think there's a sense that United are really starting to wake up again. And
Yeah,
with
they're worried a little bit, aren't they?
Ineos now starting to poach big people.
Yeah.
And Guardiola was friendly with United whenever he was dominating. All managers are like that. Mourinho used to love people he would beat all the time, so did Ferguson.
Mm-hmm.
And now United are starting to get under people's skin again because it's obvious the football club is waking up. I can understand why Ashworth wants to go to United because, look, if any of us get this right, you're talking about a football giant. And
Yep.
this has potential to be absolutely massive. And, he knows Brailsford from when he was at the FA. Brailsford likes him. This is pretty much all Dave Brailsford, from what I understand, that Blanc will be on the Ineos football team structure, so he'll have a say and he'll get a seat on United's board. So, but this is something that I don't think can wait to 2026. This is something they have to get done relatively quick. And I think realistically, he'll be at United at the end of the season?
Yeah, I think he will. I think they'll get him in within the summer, and they need to, because there are so many decisions that have to be made. When we talk through all of these players, all these positions, there's recruitment, there's decisions on so many players that are on United's books at this point in time, that have long-standing consequences for the club from a financial perspective, and the types of impacts that these players can make. You have so much that can change things financially from United's standpoint, sitting there when you're talking about decisions on players like Mason Greenwood, on Scott McTominay. Those are players who have a lot of value, that have that are academy players that could be sold. The players who are all out on loan. Varane and his wages and his expiring deal this summer is 300,000 plus a week that can come off, which practically funds a transfer for someone like, Jared Braithwaite on its own, if you handle things correctly. Casemiro, obviously similar to that, if you can move him on. Jadon Sancho, there is an enormous amount of movement that can occur that could totally change that whole PSR picture if it is done right. And so I think it's worth what it's going to take to do that.
We'll get into that in just a second, but yeah, I would love to see that the same Braithwaite. I was listening to Jimmy Carragher talk about him yesterday.
Yeah.
Saying how special he is. Would love to see United get him. He's versatile, can play. He's left-footed too, and it's definitely something United need to fix. Speaking of PSR, its impact on recruitment, because there's different messages coming out about what type of room for manoeuvre United truly have this summer. James Ducker put a piece out that said, United were really struggling in the market. They would have a very diminished. This is not the first time I've heard this, by the way.
Sure. Yeah.
We'll have a very diminished transfer budget this summer, should they not qualify for the Champions League. There's still a lot of pending variables, like you said. Could you sell Mason Greenwood? Jadon Sancho would obviously fetch a decent fee, assuming he.
Mm-hmm.
I think he had a bit of a drop off the last 2 weeks, but assuming he can consistently find form between now and the end of the season, he'd fetch a decent fee. There's a couple of others that are on the fringes that would, fetch decent fees. And I think that United are making decisions in a way that they weren't, obviously, a year ago. I think that they would sell these players and be a lot more proficient about how they sell. They're going to have to do that, regardless of whether they qualify for the Champions League or not. But Swedish Ramble is fantastic. Follow if you haven't followed them, you should do. Seem to disagree with the numbers, how they were crunched, and what is actually available this summer. What's your understanding of what United can do this summer?
I think that a big part of it depends on the counting of Jim Ratcliffe's investment, that 200 million, because as we know, we've talked about where United were falling afoul of FFP or PSR, I should say, in that there's this allowable loss cap, right, of 15 million. And that can be raised to 105 million. And this is over 3 years. It's not a single year. This can be raised to 105 million with owner investment, right? Jim Ratcliffe's putting 200 million into the club already, I think, is a part of the deal that happens instantly. And by the end of this year, another 100 million. So it's well beyond the 90 million there. If that money is counted, then it raises the cap for United's losses. I don't think they were in danger necessarily of going way over that 15 million in losses cap prior to this all occurring. I think they were close to it, though. I say in danger. I think they were close to it, where maybe it was going to go a little over, which would have been problematic, something to have to resolve. So I think there's potentially a lot of space there, but you kind of do have to think with that too. It's an extra 90 million, but it's over 3 years. So you can't do things that are next year going to be a problem. You can't say, oh, we're going to lose 105 million this year by buying all these players, when those fees are going to be there next year and those wages are going to be there next year. You can't, you know what I mean? Like this is not a one-time, when you're buying these players, it's not a one-time expense. It's money that's going on every year. And so maybe you could increase it to where you lose 30 million and then 30 million next year and 30 million next year, right? And reach that cap. But that's maybe 100 million in transfer spend plus wages. It's not 300 million or 400 million. Obviously, you can have increases in revenue, sponsorships, new deals, and things that Ineos will be looking to do to improve commercial revenue. Champions League money is going to improve over the next few years. There's also going to be more games. So it's a fine balance. And I think you're also walking a line of, obviously, you don't want anyone to get the perspective that you're walking in with a massive amount of money to spend. But I do think it'll be reasonable and very, very much down to those outs. Because if there's one thing that Ineos have preached, and it is not about penny pinching and it is not about being cheap, it is about being smart in the market, because these PSR rules are real and they are here to stay. And the rules for the UEFA are changing too, in terms of these caps that are decreasing every single year from 90% to 80% to 70% of your revenues to be spent on football. This is all real, and you're going to have to spend well and spend properly in order to be successful. You cannot just do whatever you want. And so I think a lot of it's going to come down to outs and these wages, especially the wages being cleared off. If you're seeing Rafael Varane leave, if you're seeing Casemiro leave, if you're seeing a significant fee for Mason Greenwood, if you're seeing, movement of players like McTominay, then you could see a massive summer, because those deals do have a huge impact on it. But I think it's dependent. I think it is dependent on that. And I think for them, the strategy even then will be buy young players who are not demanding big wages. Because 50 million is not 50 million. 50 million for Casemiro is not the same as 50 million for, to use the example again, Gerard Braithwaite. When you're paying 350,000 a week, that's an extra 12.5 million a year in wages versus somebody who's making 75 to 100,000. It's a massive difference.
Ineos have to be really careful, James, because they're going to lose a lot of the feel-good credit if you never underperform on the field. Because ultimately that's what they're going to be judged on.
Sure.
And when you look at people like Real Madrid that are going and getting Mbappe, they've already got Bellingham. I mean, who is United's contemporaries? Who are their peers? Who are they going to be compared with? Because I think, obviously City, are exceptional. Ultimately, if United aren't competing with the top teams, Ineos will not be looked upon favorably. So they've got to get this balance right between being fiscally responsible. I think one of the things that is really important, and it illustrates the need for a really functional football department, is managers spend differently in their second season than they do in their first. And had United have gone out and got Frankie de Jong in their first season, where would that leave Kobbie Mainoo right now? Right? I don't believe, and I have this on good authority, that Ten Hag would have signed Anthony in the second season. Because what he knows in the second season, United as a football club should have knew up in Ten Hag's first season. There should have been people at United saying, this kid is not suited for Manchester United. You don't know this yet because you haven't been here, but here's why. And so the football department overrules that and says, no, because in your first season, we're not going to let you spend 85 million to find out what we already know. Right? So we can avoid this. Because to me, one of the why Anthony's feeling at United is obvious. Right? One, he's not suited to the Premier League. Two, I don't think he deals psychologically well with the things that are going on off the field. And to me, there's certain things that any functional football club would have stood out and said, this is why I don't think he's suited to the Premier League. Even with Casemiro had a fantastic run of form for 3 or 4 months last season, but now you see some of his attributes as he slows. You're going to see more and more of this. You're going to see more and more yellow. This is a position in football. It's conducive to picking up yellow cards because there's a lot of physical contact. It's very, a lot of the best players and teams are playing in an attacking midfield role. And so you have to have an exceptional defensive midfielder and they pick up yellow cards quite a bit. But to me, this is not going to get better. But Casemiro have an issue there. But this is why they need a functioning football department. So, this summer is going to be something that they're going to have to get right. And this is, again, why I think, it's really important that even if Ashworth doesn't start until the summer, he's influencing decisions from the sidelines before that, because it's the same with Barada, that they have to have direction and certainty over their targets that they're pursuing, whether they qualify for the Champions League or not. They can't wait until they qualify for the Champions League to start pursuing targets. And
Yes.
again, there's going to have to be a clear contrast between how United do business in the past and how they do business in the future this summer.
Yeah, there will be, and they have to get it right this summer. But I think also at the same time, because of the things that have occurred, people do have to be a little bit patient with it. And I know it's hard to ask of football fans to do so, but this isn't a 1-year this is, I use the word project there, but this isn't a 1-year fix, let's say, right? It isn't. This is not being fixed in one summer. There's no doubt about it. This is how many years of mismanagement, right? I mean, even under Sir Alex Ferguson during the last 5 years, it was poor, really poor, how the club was being managed, how the transfers was being done, how everything was happening. They picked up a lot of older players that allowed him to win some games, but did not leave United with something afterwards. It's 15 years of mistakes, 15 years of errors, 15 years, on the pitch of problems. It's not going to take one summer. And if it takes a summer to get things under control, because, as I mentioned about FFP, that goes down again next summer, and then it levels out and it stays where it is. But that goes down another 10% next summer, so they have to think with not this summer, just this summer, but also next summer. It's going to be difficult, to shed a lot of the players that they shouldn't have, right now at United.
What do you need to do this summer? I don't know.
At minimum, I think you have to be rid of the players who are not going to play, right? One way or another, that has to happen, right? It's almost inexcusable. You cannot go into next year with Donny van de Beek and Jadon Sancho in the team if they're not going to be used. You can't. You can't have them.
In terms of players coming in, to me, you're talking about at least a right back.
Right back, center back, and 2 midfielders is like an absolute minimum. You're gonna have to see. I know.
That's a lot of business. So now you're talking about a right back, a left back at least, another centre back, right?
Let me back up a second here.
Already in the summer, you're talking about another midfielder to replace maybe Casemiro. I think they would consider letting Eriksen go. I still think they've got a decision to make over Anthony. If Anthony, what do they do with him? If they sell Jadon Sancho, they're still short up front. I mean, you're talking about a lot of business.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I think there's a couple of things that could happen, right? Number one is, if it was up to me, I'd be getting Wan-Bissaka on that. I'd be keeping him for next season, no matter what, because it's going to cost a lot more to replace him than it is to keep him.
But think about this, James, on Wan-Bissaka. Now, you know this, and I know this. He was not particularly happy with what happened with Jadon Sancho.
Yeah.
And he's had some personal. Anyway,
I just think this is where Ineos can make a difference in terms of properly resolving things. That's an opinion of mine that I've held for some time. It's actually one of the things I don't like how many players have had disagreements with Ten Hag. At the same time, I also think it's poor management from the structure of the club to allow these things to accelerate or to denigrate into what they've become. Who's there to it's not the manager's job to manage these players' careers. It's not the manager's job to keep them happy. Actually, it's not. There are people at the club who are supposed to do so. We're supposed to work with them on understanding what their role is, what their job is, what's happening, what they need to do. And I think that for me, it would be a positive to see. When I say what they need to do, I think it's that, or you're going to have to spend a lot, to replace players if you're not going to sort out, to some degree, some of the unhappiness that's prevalent throughout the playing squad. And that is an area they could save money, not for the purpose of saving money, but for the purpose of it's better overall. You don't want to have to spend at right back. There's some youth players coming up at fullback that I think, that are highly rated, where you would hope to not have to spend a lot of money there, to allow them to come into that backup position. But obviously, it's going to be a measure of Luke Shaw and Tyrell Malacia's health coming to summer. But I mean, yeah, it is an enormous amount. There's no way you look at it and say it's not an enormous amount of problems to solve, and it's and that's why I say it's a couple of years, because look at some of what we talked about. You have Jadon Sancho, Mason Greenwood, and Anthony as forwards, which overall between spent and value is probably somewhere in the range of 200 million. And you're thinking, I don't know if we can use any of these players next season.
Yeah, what football club deals with that issue? Like, I mean, these
That's
are
insane.
things that have to get addressed. And I agree with you that as a football club, United have to have better control parameters that prevent this thing from extrapolating into a much bigger issue than what it should be. It should be managed much quicker. Say, okay, we're going to get quick resolutions to these issues. You may not like each other, that's fine. I do think that you're correct in saying that, it's not Ten Hag's job to make someone happy. But I do think you also, as a leader, have to have an ability to adapt your personality to different people.
I agree.
That Anthony psychologically, every player deals with things different psychologically. And every great leader, whether you're a general or whatever it is, your people want to play for you. They want to fight for you. Right?
Yeah.
They may not agree with you. They may not like your discipline. There may be certain things they disagree on. But ultimately, they want to please you. They want to perform for you. And I think that every great leader has to have that. You can't always rule with an iron fist. I think there has to be ways of emotionally connecting with people to get the best out of them, because people are psychologically different and they need different things. But I do agree that as a football club, there needs to be more coherence across the club about what is acceptable, what isn't, and these issues should not be allowed to develop and fester, because, of course, they spread throughout the team. So, there's a lot of work to be done. By the way, on the topic that you just mentioned there about youth players, on last week's Talk of the Devils, there's a fantastic interview with Nick Cox. I strongly suggest you go listen to it. Especially if you're a youth coach, or if you're involved in football, or if you're a parent, if you've got a kid at youth football, strongly suggest you listen to that. Brilliant story in there about how United signed Alejandro Garnacho, by the way, quite funny. If you haven't had a chance to listen to it, Nick talks about the fact that they were signing him over COVID, and they had to do an interview with him via Zoom through a translator, and his two kids are in the next room battling each other over an Xbox controller, which is something we can all relate to. And it almost, maybe Garnacho was like, "No, I'm not coming, this is chaos." But he also talks about the jump in levels between the under 18s, under 21s, up to the Premier League is massive, and sometimes we do put too much pressure on young players to just, he's good at this level, why don't we just put him in? But, it's very hard to get players out of that level to get them into your first team. But quite encouraging. The under-18s had won 14 in a row with the Derby. And the future does look good for United. But we shall see, mate. We'll go ahead and leave it there. Thanks to all of you for downloading, liking this podcast, sharing it, and commenting on it. We sincerely appreciate that, and we'll be back again next week.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you all.
See you again. Bye.
Bye.